to see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the
This is Assemblywoman Cottie Petrie Norris. It is a pleasure to join you to celebrate the centennial of the 19th Amendment. 100 years of having the vote. 100 years of having a voice. 100 years of having a seat at the table. I join you today as a California State Assemblywoman because of the tireless activism of generations of women who came before me. And we all stand on the shoulders of those first suffragettes who gathered in 1848 in Seneca Falls to demand equal rights for women, including the right to vote. The very first women were actually elected to the California legislature in 1918, some 7 years after California women had been granted the right to vote at the state level, and some 2 years before the 19th Amendment would become a reality for the nation. Grace Doris, Estelle Broughton, Elizabeth Hughes, and Anna Saylor. I myself was elected in 2018, some 100 years later. And at my swearing-in ceremony, I was asked a very intriguing question by a former Assemblywoman. She said to me, "What number woman are you?" I said, "Well, there's 23 women in the Assembly right now, 23 out of 80, so it's not great, but we're getting there." She said, "No, what number woman are you?" Out of the 4,400 people who have served in California's legislature, what number woman are you? So I went and looked into it, and I have to say the answer shocked me and shocks me even today. 162. 162. I am the 162nd woman ever to serve in California's legislature. And for me, that just really highlights how much work we still have to do and how much of this fight is still in front of us. So it is an honor and privilege to represent you in the California State Assembly, and it is an honor and privilege to continue to fight alongside you. To fight for women, to fight for women's rights, and to fight for what is right.
Hi, I'm Congressman Harley Rouda, and I'm here to join you in celebration of 100 years of women voting in the United States. 100 years of women improving our nation. 100 years of women bettering our political process. 100 years of women representing our communities at the ballot box. It was in 1848. Suffragists came together at Seneca Halls and lobbied, marched, organized, and protested for the right to vote. Finally, in 1919, 101 years ago, the United States House of Representatives finally approved the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, sending the amendment to the states to ratify. In 1920, the 19th Amendment was added to our Constitution. As a current member of the United States House of Representatives, I can personally attest that the women I serve alongside are some of the best, if not the best, legislators in the building. I don't need to tell you twice, women get things done. And yet it's clear that there is still prevalent and pervasive sexism in our nation. And we saw it last week. This sexism even occurs on the steps of the U.S. Capitol building. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that while we are celebrating 100 years of women voting, not all women were granted the ability to perform their sacred patriotic duty 100 years ago. Women of color waited decades to be given equal rights under the law and still receive less pay than their white sisters today. We have a lot to celebrate, but we also have a lot of work to do to ensure women, all women, are given the same rights, privileges, respect, autonomy, and security as men. When asked to discuss women's issues, my colleague Senator Harris likes to joke and say, quote, "I'm so glad you want to talk about the economy," unquote. Especially during the coronavirus crisis, economic policy, worker protections, and paid leave are women's issues. Women have been fighting on the front lines of this pandemic and are facing unique challenges both at home and in the workplace. 1/3 of essential jobs are held by women. A majority of the social and healthcare workers are women. Women truly are keeping our nation running during the coronavirus crisis. So, thank you. Thank all of you for keeping our communities together. Thank you for advocating for equity. And finally, thank you for exercising your right to vote. I'll keep fighting for you in the halls of Congress and working to protect Orange County working families and small businesses. I am proud to serve as the most legislatively productive freshman member of Congress, an achievement I could not have accomplished without the tireless effort of my staff, 60% of whom are women. My office is here to serve you. You can visit rouda.house.gov or call 202-225-2415, and my incredible constituent services team, an all-star, all-woman team, can assist you with everything from passport applications to small business paycheck protection loans. Congratulations on this incredible milestone. Take care.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg famously said, "When I am sometimes asked when there will be enough women on the Supreme Court, and I answer when there are 9, people are shocked. But there had been 9 men, and nobody ever raised a question about that. Imagine a woman like Ruth Bader Ginsburg never having the opportunity to serve on the Supreme Court." The 19th Amendment has had far-reaching implications for women. It's opened a lot of doors, albeit too slowly. I spent my entire career in business, eventually in executive leadership positions. I've hired and trained more women than I can ever count. I've served on various boards and voted on many issues. And as a Laguna Beach City Council member, I'm proud to say that nobody has ever asked me if I'm capable of doing the job because I'm a woman. On this day, we pay homage to those women who for decades fought for our right to vote.
There was a time our happiness seemed never ending. I was so sure that where we were heading was right. Life was a road so certain and straight and unbending. Our little road with never a crossroad in sight. Back in the days when we spoke with civilized voices, women in white and sturdy young men at the oar. Back in the days when I let you make all my choices. We can never go back to before. There was a time my feet were so my stars and my ocean. We can never go back to before. We can never go back to before.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
The campaign for women's suffrage began in earnest in the decades before the Civil War. In 1647, Margaret Brent of Maryland Colony assumed her right to vote twice, once for herself as a property owner and once for Lord Cecil Calvert of Baltimore because he had given her his proxy. However, the governor denied the request. Deborah Moody in 1655 cast a vote in New Netherlands, later to become New York. She had the right to vote because she had land grant in her own name. Lydia Taft in 1756 was credited with being the first woman to legally vote in the British colonies of the New World. Taft voted in town meetings in Oxbridge, Massachusetts. September 6, 1870, Louisa Ann Swain of Laramie, Wyoming voted. She was the first woman who voted legally in the U.S. after 1807. In 1777, women lost the right to vote in New York. In 1780, women lost the right to vote in Massachusetts. And in 1784, women lost the right to vote in New Hampshire. So this leads you to believe if they actually lost the right to vote, then they originally had the right to vote. Interesting. In 1787, the U.S. Constitution Convention places voting qualifications in the hands of the states. Women in all states except New Jersey lose the right to vote. So here we are, 1787. Evidently, women had the right to vote before then, even though it was denied them, as in the case in Massachusetts. But now they actually have made law taking the vote away from them. So when I talk in grade schools, I usually tell the children, when the country was formed, women had all rights. Women were doctors, women were lawyers, women did everything to help form this country. And then once it got settled is when stuff started being taken away.
So, honey, I was wondering how you feel about women's rights.
Those two words don't go together.
What words?
Women and rights.
Really?
Yes, really.
So you don't think women should have a voice in government?
No, of course not. Now, where's my dinner?
Seems that I've got me a no-vote vagina, and my place is at home. Have you got one too, Lady Charms galore? Husbands and brothers telling us they know so much more. But don't be whiny, let's get out, kick some hiney. We've got the right hormones. They say I've got me a no-vote vagina and no Y chromosome.
Now, little lady, you leave everything to me. You're the weaker sex, so don't worry your pretty little head.
You know I've got a brain, right?
Yeah.
Seems that I've got me
You're never
a
gonna get it.
no-vote vagina.
Don't be so lost you don't know
And
how
my
to
place
But what if
is
you're more than
at
sick?
home. I'm gonna change their mind.
You'll have to wait in line.
We're due to break through. Arm in arm, go door to door.
Now there's a new attack.
Sisters and brothers, tease them all.
vagina holds you back.
Now is the time, Steve,
I would
to get out.
it.
Kick some hiney.
The founding fathers knew this.
Fire up our own mouth. Come on, what do you say?
You'll never get your way. Don't let it tell you that's a no vote vagina, or that your chromosomes are weaker. Let's make our choices no.
So it makes you wonder about how important it is to speak up. In 1838, Kentucky passed the first statewide woman suffrage law, allowing female head of households in rural areas to vote in elections deciding taxes and local events. In 1848, a group of abolitionist activists, mostly women, but some men, gathered in Seneca Falls, New York, to discuss problems of women in general and the right to vote. This 1848 convention in Seneca Falls is often when people say that's when the fight started. That's why they say 72 years it took to get the vote. They're going from that date in 1848. But as I've shown, women actually voted before then and fought for their right to vote before then. So it was much longer than a 72-year fight. The reformers Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott organized that 1848 convention. Most agreed that American women were autonomous individuals who deserved their own individual rights, including the right to vote. They believed women had their own political identities. A little side here is that even today, I know you'll find this unbelievable as I did, I overheard a young couple talking about voting, and the wife said something along the lines of, well, I'm not sure who even's running, and her husband said, don't worry, I'll tell you how to vote. Oh. Yes, that was my response too. No. In 1851, Susan B. Anthony met Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So this is 3 years after that convention in Seneca Falls. So Susan B. Anthony wasn't at that convention. She met Elizabeth Cady Stanton in 1851 and joined the struggle then going forward. So even though oftentimes you'll hear Susan B. Anthony was the foremother of everything, not so much. There were a whole lot of women that came before her and after her for this struggle. The American Equal Rights Association formed in 1866, working for suffrage for both women and African Americans. In 1867, Kansas held a state referendum on whether to enfranchise women and or black males. So it was either or. Lucy Stone, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton traveled the state from one end to the other, speaking in favor of women's suffrage. However, both women's and African American men got voted down. No suffrage was to be. In 1868, the 14th Amendment was ratified, introducing the word male into the Constitution for the first time. In 1869, the territory of Wyoming was the first to grant women unrestricted suffrage. That becomes important because when later on Wyoming was considering becoming a state, they negotiated, we will not be a state if women don't keep the right to vote. So for them, it was a package deal. You want us as a state, our women get the right to vote, which is why Wyoming was the first state to have women vote. In 1869, the National Women's Suffrage Association, led by Anthony, was formed to agitate for an amendment in the Constitution. So this is when we first started seeing a more aggressive behavior happen around the vote. Before then, it was pretty much tea parties and, get together after church to talk about it, but they weren't really being as vocal and out in the public. Well, Susan B. changed all of that. The American Women's Suffrage Association, led by Lucy Stone and Julia Ward Howe, tied itself closely to the Republican Party because back then the Republican Party said they would support women's suffrage. In 1870, the Utah Territory granted suffrage to women. So again, territory, not state yet. Also in 1870, the 15th Amendment is adopted, prohibiting the federal government and each state from denying a citizen the right to vote based on that citizen's race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So the 15th Amendment is what gave African American men the vote. Now remember, for a long time women argued this gave them the vote too, but because of that little 14th Amendment where they stuck that word male in, that's why that didn't apply here. In 1871, Victoria Woodhull spoke to the House Judiciary Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives, arguing that women have the right to vote under the 14th Amendment. The committee did not agree with her. And also that same year, the Anti-Suffrage Party formed. So not all women were for suffrage. Surprise, surprise. In 1872, Susan B. Anthony registered and voted in Rochester, New York. She was arrested a few days later. So this is how Susan B. operated. She would just assume she could do something, so she'd go do it. And then, like, you could just picture this, right? A whole bunch of guys in the back room going, can she really do that? Weren't we supposed to stop her? Is that okay? Is it not okay? You can just picture it. And so it took them 2 days to arrest her for doing it. They let her do it at the time. And her trial was held the following year in 1873. She asked for a jury trial. The judge said no way. He was not going to have a bunch of people in his courtroom. So she lost her case. She was fined $100, which she never paid. In 1875, the Supreme Court case of Minor versus Happersett, unanimously the court rejected the argument that either the Privileges and Immunities Clause or the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment extended the vote to women. So now we've got the Supreme Court putting their stamp on it. Women do not have the vote yet.
No man is greater than his mother. No man is half so good. No man is better than the wife he loves. Her love will guide him, whatever betide him. She's good enough to love you and adore you. She's good enough to bear your troubles for you. And if your tears were falling today, nobody else would kiss them away. She's good enough to warm your heart with kisses when you are lonesome and blue. She's good enough to be your baby's mother. And she's good enough to vote with you. Men plunge the world in war and sadness. She must protest in vain. Let's hope and pray someday we'll hear her say, stop all your madness, I bring you gladness. She's good enough to love you and adore you. She's good enough to bear your troubles for you. And if your tears were falling today, nobody else would kiss them away. She's good enough to warm your heart with kisses when you are lonesome and blue. She's good enough to be your baby's mother. And she's good enough to vote with you.
Following that loss, suffragists then turned to states. They figured nothing's going on at the federal level, so let's go state to state to state. We got to get this vote going. So in 1878, a constitutional amendment was proposed that provided the right of citizens to vote shall not be abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. This same amendment would be introduced in every session of Congress for the next 41 years. You know how sometimes we complain things take so long? So nowadays, what is it, 2 years? If they don't pass it in 2 years, the law gets dropped and then they have to rewrite it. 41 years. Those exact words were put before Congress. Nada. The amendment was introduced, I always find this interesting being a native Californian, was introduced by Senator Aaron Sargent of California. In 1882, the U.S. House and Senate both appoint committees on women's suffrage. And we know what committees do, right? We've handled it now. There's a committee, ladies. Go talk to the committee. So, in 1886, the suffrage amendment was defeated 2-1 in the U.S. Senate. In 1887, the Edmunds-Tucker Act takes the vote away from women in Utah in order to suppress the Mormon vote in the Utah Territory. Rhode Island becomes the first eastern state to vote on a women's suffrage referendum, but as you can guess, it did not pass. In 1890, both the National and the American Women's Suffrage Association merged to form the National American Women's Suffrage Association. The first president was Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and the focus turned again to the state level. Let's win this state by state. In 1890, a suffrage campaign lost in South Dakota. The territory of Wyoming, which allowed women to vote, was admitted as a state, therefore becoming the first state to allow women to vote, 1890. In 1894, despite 600,000 signatures, a petition for women's suffrage is outright ignored in New York. In 1893, men vote for women's suffrage in Colorado, making it the second state. I like the way this reads because I think it's important for us to remember men had to vote for us to get the vote because they're the only ones who could vote. So if men hadn't have voted for women's suffrage, we still wouldn't have women's suffrage. Probably have a higher divorce rate too, but that's another topic. In 1896, women's suffrage returns to Utah, which gains statehood. So it's the third state giving women the right to vote. In the same year, Idaho granted women's suffrage, fourth state, Idaho. In 1897, the National American Women's Suffrage Association began publishing the National Suffrage Gazette. It was edited by Carrie Chapman Catt. So now we're putting it in writing. We're getting it out to people who can't get to talks or who can't get to the meetings about it. So we're getting the news out there. In 1902, women from 10 nations meet in Washington, D.C. to plan an international effort for suffrage. Always thinking bigger, broader. In 1902, the men of New Hampshire vote down a women's suffrage referendum. In 1904, Reverend Dr. Anna Howard Shaw takes over as president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. In 1906, Elizabeth Cady Stanton's daughter, Harriet Stanton Blatch, returns from England and forms the Equality League of Self-Supporting Women, with a membership based in professional and industrial working women. Now we're bringing labor women into the movement. We're bringing educated women into the movement. And this is the group that started suffrage parades. I'm sure you've heard of suffrage parades. I think Iron Jawed Angels shows you one of the biggest ones. In 1910, Emma Smith DeVoe organizes a grassroots campaign in Washington state where women win suffrage. The fifth state to win suffrage, Washington. Notice all 5 are in the West. None in the East so far, even though that's really where it started. All 5 in the West. Harriet Stanton Blatch's Equality League changes its name to the Women's Political Union. Emulating the grassroots tactics of labor activists, the Women's Political Union organizes America's first large-scale suffrage parade in New York City, 1910. 1911, California becomes the 6th state to give women the vote. Women won the vote in the state of California by less than 1 vote per precinct. That statistic to me is important because whenever people argue, my vote doesn't count, my vote doesn't count, it's like, yeah, it kind of does. You just never know.
You keep saying you know what's
In 1912, Theodore Roosevelt's Progressive Party included women's suffrage in their platform. Yay, somebody on a national level, finally, yes, women should get the vote. I'm sure he did it figuring, look at how many women in the West already have the vote, so chances are I'll get presidency if we let them all vote. In 1912, Oregon, 7th state to give women the vote. Arizona, 8th state to give women the vote. Kansas, 9th state to grant women suffrage. So 9 states, by the end of 1912, women had the right to vote. In 1913, Alice Paul becomes the leader of the Congressional Union, a militant branch of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. So now we're really going to get strong-armed. Alice Paul organizes the Women's Suffrage Procession, a parade in Washington, D.C. on the eve of Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. The parade is attacked by mobs. Women were burned with cigarettes. They were kicked. They were pushed down. No arrests were made. The police just hung by the sides. Nothing was done about it. Didn't stop the women, but clearly, women are tough. We are tough. The Alaskan Territory grants women the right to vote, 1913. And Illinois grants municipal and presidential, but not state suffrage to the women. Interesting. We're going state by state. Let's give women the vote. And here's a state that says, no, you can vote over there. You just can't vote here. Okay. Attorney Inez Milholland heralded the grand procession. This is that first parade on a horse. She wore armor. She was a beautiful and intelligent epitome of the new generation of suffragists. The thing I like best about Attorney Inez Milholland, who really is a phenomenal woman. If you have an opportunity to read more about her, there's a film out about her by Martha Wheelock. Phenomenal woman. This is a woman who, because she married someone outside the United States, was no longer considered a citizen. She was a citizen of the country her husband was from. So she was never going to get the vote here anyway. But it never stopped. She died fighting for women's right to vote. So amazing stories. I mean, just amazing, one after the other, of the women who have fought so hard for this right that we have finally. Kate Gordon organized the Southern States Women's Suffrage Conference. Suffragists planned to lobby the state legislatures, but they were lobbying for white women only getting the vote. So now we really see the divide begin. The Senate votes on a women's suffrage amendment, but it doesn't pass. In 1914, Nevada and Montana grant women's suffrage. So from 1912, finally 1914, 2 more states give women the vote. The Congressional Union alienates the leaders of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. So now the 2 groups are splitting, mostly because the Congressional Union was campaigning against the anti-suffrage Democrats. So now women are starting to see, let's go after the people who aren't voting for us, the ones who are sitting around actually articulating we don't want women to win the vote. So they're thinking more on a political strategy now. Let's start going after those people and see if we can't make a move. In 1916, Alice Paul and others broke away from the National American Women's Suffrage Association and formed the National Woman's Party. Woodrow Wilson promises that the Democratic Party platform will endorse women's suffrage. Promises. Montana elects suffragist Jeanette Rankin to the House of Representatives, the first woman elected to Congress. In 1917, beginning in January, the National Woman's Party posts silent sentinels of liberty outside the White House. The National Woman's Party is the first group to picket the White House. 1917, first time anybody thought, oh, we should picket the White House. We don't like what they're doing. And look what they started. Now you can't even get near the White House to picket it. During that time, nearly 500 women are arrested and 168 actually serve jail time. November 1917, the Night of Terror occurs at the Occoquan Workhouse in Virginia, in which suffrage prisoners are beaten and abused. And the U.S. enters World War II. Which do you think got the most news? Under the leadership of Carrie Chapman Catt, the National Women's Suffrage Association aligns itself with the war effort in order to gain support for women's suffrage, right? And which, looking back in history, was a really smart move on her part, because the country was behind the war. They were behind, freedom and all of that for the United States. So women know, we fought the civil rights movement. We fought for vote. I mean, we know how to fight. So get behind this movement. It'll get us positive press, because that's what we needed at this point. We needed the positive press. Arkansas grants women the right to vote in primary, but not general elections. It's always this piece by piece. The New York State Constitution grants women suffrage. New York, the first eastern state to finally give women the right to vote, 1917. Oklahoma and South Dakota state constitutions grant women suffrage, same year. 1918, the jailed suffragists are finally released from prison, and an appellate court rules all the arrests were illegal. They were all illegal. Nothing happened, mind you, just kind of like nobody got arrested for the beating up the women at the parade. Just, oh yeah, sorry, it's illegal. The 19th Amendment passes in 1918, the U.S. House, with exactly a 2/3 vote, but loses by 2 votes in the Senate. 2 votes. Jeanette Rankin opens debate on it in the House, and President Wilson addresses the Senate in support of it. In 1919, Michigan grants women full suffrage. The National American Women's Suffrage Association holds its convention in St. Louis, where Cherry Chapman Catt rallies to transform that association into the League of Women Voters. 1919. In January, the National Women's Party hires and guards a watchfire for freedom. It's maintained, so this is January 1919. This watchfire was lit and maintained until suffrage became, the amendment passed. June 4th, Senate finally passed the amendment. So now we got to go to the states and get it ratified, right? So now Congress has done their thing. Finally, yes. But now we got to go to the states and get ratified. So the 19th Amendment is ratified, stating the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the U.S. or by any state on account of sex. The importance of the way this is worded is it's citizens. That word becomes important when we see who did not get the right to vote from this amendment. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. So the important thing to know is when this got ratified in 1920, which, by the way, it got ratified by the vote of one man in Tennessee, Harry Burns, who stood up to vote and put his hands in his pocket, and there was a note in his pocket. And he pulled it out, and it was from his mom. And she said, do the right thing. And he did. So we had the states we needed to ratify it, became the 19th Amendment of the United States.
Let's go, girls. We're going out tonight, we're putting up a fight, we're gonna let it all come out. Wanna make some noise, really raise our voice, yeah, we wanna scream and shout. No prohibitions, fight these conditions, not gonna toe the line. State our demands, political reform, women's right to vote, it's time. So don't degrade us for being a woman, it's our prerogative to yell equality. And whoa, it's gonna get crazy, forget that we're ladies, pantsuits, kick boots, whoa, really get wild, yeah, we are good and proud. Whoa, affirmative action, a chain reaction, better beware, we're on a tear. Whoa, we wanna be free, yeah, inferior. Our Constitution's made of stone. We don't need romance, just looking for a chance to buy a piece of land of our own. So don't degrade us for being a woman. It's our prerogative to yell equality. And whoa, it's gonna get crazy. Forget that we're ladies. Pantsuits, kick boots. Whoa, really get wild. Yeah, we are good and wild. Whoa, affirmative action, a chain reaction. Better beware, we're on a tear. Whoa, wanna be free, how to vote the way we feel. Man, the power of a woman. So don't degrade us for being a woman. It's our prerogative to yell equality. Whoa, it's gonna get crazy. Forget that we're ladies. Pantsuits, kick boots. Whoa, really get wild. Yeah, we are good and wild. Whoa, affirmative action, a chain reaction. Better beware, we're on a tear. Whoa, we wanna be free, how to vote the way we feel. Man, the power of a woman. It's gonna get crazy. Can you feel it, ladies? Gonna get crazy. Woo, woo, woo. Power of a woman.
At this time, all women who were citizens in the United States got the vote. So people often ask, did black women get the vote? Absolutely, African American women got the vote, if they were citizens, okay? The problem is, in the post-Civil War era, in the Jim Crow, African American women couldn't get the polls. If they got to the polls, they couldn't read, or they were taxed, poll taxes. You had to pay to vote. Who else had to pay to vote? So they tried these little things requiring women to get, they had to get somebody to vouch for them. So if you were African American and you showed up at the poll, if you didn't have, and by someone they meant a man, preferably a white man, saying, yes, you were a citizen, you could vote, they could literally just turn you away. Sorry. Unlike the days, remember when Susan B. would just show up and register and vote, and then they arrested her? These women couldn't even get that far. If they didn't pay the poll tax, or didn't have someone vouch for them, or couldn't read, so long. Didn't matter. So legally they had the right to vote, but as we know, legally, pay equity's a law. So yeah, not so much. Okay, and then the southern states held white-only Democratic primaries. So only whites could vote in the primaries. So, like we make it up as we go along, folks. In 1924, Native American women finally got the right to vote because the Indian Citizenship Act gave them citizenship. So now they got to vote 4 years later because now they were citizens. 1943, 23 years later, Chinese immigrants, including women, received the right to vote by the Magnuson Act because now they're made citizens. 1943. 1952, the race restrictions of 1790 naturalization law are repealed by the McCarran-Walter Act, giving first-generation Japanese Americans the right to vote because now they're citizens, so they can vote. 1964, the 24th Amendment is ratified by 2/3 of the states, formally abolishing poll taxes and literacy tests. 1964. So from 1920 to 1964, 44 years, they were able to pull that stuff. Poll taxes, literacy tests. They had to make it a law to force people to stop doing it. In 1965, because of course that wasn't enough, 1964, we finally get the Voting Rights Act, which strenuously prohibits racial discrimination. I love that wording. Strenuously prohibits. So I guess it's still okay, but please don't do it. So voting increased in 1965. In 1966, Harper versus the Virginia Board of Elections strikes down poll taxes at all levels of government. So now it's law, no more poll taxes. This is one of my favorite little notes. In 1984, okay, like, what's that, less than 40 years ago, 1984, the good old state of Mississippi becomes the last state to ratify the 19th Amendment. The last state, 1984. And then one of my other favorite things, just because it happened the year I turned 18, in 1971, the US lowered the voting age to 18. So when I turned 18, I got to vote, yay! And I haven't missed an election since. So that is the history of women's suffrage in the United States. Thank you very much.
Dear America, I hope this letter finds you well. I write urgently in the name of a people who have been writing for a very long time, under candles and fluorescent lamps, a people who wrote under handles to avoid scandals, so I hope you can understand. America, we found through revolution an institution that broke down our frustration for the cry of taxation without representation, and I think this is where it began. 244 years ago, 56 white men signed the Declaration of Independence, and in that time we have done little to represent an entire half of our population. I hope you understand the gravity of this situation because it has only been 100 years since the 19th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified. It has only been 100 years since some women have had the right to vote in representatives that understand the struggle it is to be a woman in a world caught up in the divine right of men. Time and time again, women took to the streets, campaigned and demanded and spoke, and people were uneasy, so they jeered and they jailed and they force-fed, and surely this sounds familiar. Why does this still sound familiar? America, it has only been 4 years since the first time the public nominated a woman to lead the United States. America, we have been writing and campaigning and speaking and demanding, and we have received change, so maybe you'll think it's strange we want more than semi-equal wages and so far meaningless words on pages, and maybe this enrages you. But, America, it has been 244 years since we decided that states together were stronger than states divided, and America, it is time to make the women who kept fighting proud. It is time to include everyone left out of the original crowd. To America, from all the women, from all the dreamers and the ones who refuse to give up their seats, from all the people who dream of a future where no one is left on the side of the street. America, it is our job to be loud for the future's sake, so that no person will ever be darkened by the shadow of the glass ceiling they were born to break. Regards, the women on the outside of the room.
I don't know where tomorrow finds me. The only
thing I know is where I'm standing now. In this life there never was a guarantee, which seems to be the only guarantee I've found. But keep your eyes upon the road, keep driving. It won't be long until you see a sign that says that you're arriving. And when you reach that day, when you've conquered what's behind you, don't forget the fight it took to get you here. And when you reach the top of a mountain you've been climbing, don't forget the distance you have come. It's hard when no one tells you if you're winning, but just remind yourself how far you've already come. And some days you may feel that there is no ending, but if you give up now,